Hi, welcome back to Plan 9 Crunch. I am Joe Gibson, and today is Godzilla Day 2025, so we are going to do something special. What looking into old cult magazines like the Monster Times and Famous Monsters of Filmland has revealed to me is that truly the kaiju and comic book fans are kin. The same kind of fringe fandoms that both intersect with cult film celebration. And sure enough, Godzilla has a storied history with comic books, even superhero comics. Ironically enough, even now, Marvel and DC both have dueling Godzilla runs. But today we're going to focus on what is out for Marvel that I have in Omnibus or Volume Collection. As many of the members of our audience can speak to, Godzilla was very popular for kids in the 70s, and so Stan Lee, Herb Trimpe, Doug Moench, and Archie Goodwin all got to work securing the rights and plotting out a comic series status quo that ultimately lasted 24 issues from 1977 to 1979. The series included Godzilla going up against Marvel teams and factions, but also fights against new kaiju and a giant robot called Red Ronin. Most of these decisions to increase the marquee value. Apparently, Toho wanted to renegotiate the lease to be more costly after barely communicating with the team for the 2 years. So the story reached an admittedly satisfying ending, but you can tell with some of the following storylines that Marvel is not done with Godzilla yet. So let's get a bit more into this old series and wrap up around to the new things. Alright, first I should explain a couple key characters to the series. Timothy Aloysius Cadwallader Dum Dum Dugan is a notable character in the Marvel Universe, serving under Nick Fury in the Howling Commandos and later on in S.H.I.E.L.D., the big government organization behind a lot of the stories and heroes in Marvel Comics. So Dum Dum Dugan is an expert marksman, and he's very strong and fiercely loyal to Nick Fury. Neil McDonough plays this character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but does not get to go on to interact with Nick Fury, robbing us of the dutiful second-in-command he is to Fury. There are several comic stories where Dugan dies or quits S.H.I.E.L.D., but is deemed too vital to S.H.I.E.L.D. to leave and gets brought back one way or another. Under the premise of transplanting Godzilla to the Marvel Universe, S.H.I.E.L.D. would take on the role of Monarch or G-Force or the G-Graspers, but S.H.I.E.L.D.'s use here actually predates all of those concepts, and while I doubt anyone from Toho cared to read this, there is another point of contention where this comic debatably left a distinct mark on the franchise. To make this point, I also need to bring up fan-favorite character Captain Douglas Gordon, portrayed by Don Fry. So, this archetype of the mustached, macho, incredibly reckless, but constantly badass American veteran who joins the fight against Godzilla and is prone to gruff and terse, but infinitely quotable dialogue, it seems hard to deny starts with Dum Dum Dugan and only after that becomes Captain Gordon. Once you realize that, any desires you had for Captain Gordon in a Final War sequel can transfer onto Dugan, and from there this whole series becomes so much more enjoyable. Among many other active stock plots, Dugan gets to fight a shrunken Godzilla in hand-to-hand combat, and that makes sense because the characters also have similar physical capabilities. Don Fry is of course a famous wrestler, but Dugan started his journey as a circus strongman. I think we are discussing equal levels of camp when we talk about Captain Gordon wielding a katana against aliens and being the only character speaking English in the film, and when we talk about Dum Dum Dugan trying to capture Godzilla several times and fighting him hand to hand. Okay. Another character. Dr. Douglas Beerley is a major antagonist in the series, and he goes by Dr. Demonicus and unleashes monsters upon the world. We'll get to him later, but he also has an existence in Marvel Comics outside of Godzilla. He starts here, though, as far as I'm aware. Other characters in Dum Dum Dugan's Godzilla Force that hail from other Marvel series. There's Gabe Jones, apparently one of the early notable black characters in comics. He was a Howling Commando. And Agent Jimmy Woo also has a major role here. You may have seen Jimmy Woo in the MCU Ant-Man movies and some TV shows also, I think. Anyway, this run also introduces some Japanese characters that have a history with Godzilla. A Dr. Yuriko Takiguchi, his grandson Robert, and his assistant Tamara Hashioki, that Jimmy Woo is kind of pushy in his romantic advances towards. I'm not going too deep into any of these characters, except to say that Robert is the kind of character archetype popularized by the Gamera series, of the child that is the monster's primary advocate. Think the kid from Godzilla vs. Hedorah. Except Robert is impulsive enough to commandeer a giant mech to try to de-escalate a confrontation with Godzilla. Also, Dr. Gladstone Hawkins, who joins the cast late as a reptile behavior specialist, and the fight against a shrunken Godzilla eventually gets into his museum, and he has to try and stop his artifacts from getting destroyed. I was going to try to review all these issues back to back, but then I realized that was going to be a difficult script to prepare, include more spoilers than I want to give, be lengthy as all heck, and really just take us away from the broad strokes I want to focus on, so I'm going to break this down to the relevant arcs and share a little bit of my thoughts on them. Ultimately, I do not want to replace the experience of reading the series, and I want you to buy it. I'll leave a link to the omnibus I acquired in the description. Now, all that said, most of these arcs last 1 to 3 issues, so it will be pretty in-depth anyway. The series starts the Godzilla awakening to begin his rampage across North America. Over the first 2 issues, he goes to Alaska and then Seattle. And then they wind up in San Francisco. He fights the Champions, a smaller, lower stakes and lower sales team of superheroes, because we're going to build up to a fight against the Avengers in New York. The Champions consist of Black Widow, Hercules, Iceman, and Angel. This is a very important point in the series because they screw up, and Godzilla gets away. And Dum Dum Dugan refuses to forgive them after that, and he has issues working with any superhero team after this in the run. Very funny. From there, Dr. Demonicus makes his debut. And issues 4 and 5 seem very Ebra Horror of the Deep inspired, which is interesting because Ebra is one of the monsters that eventually comes back in the 2020 series. Anyway, what I mean by that is that Demonicus has taken over an island. He is a terrorist, very flamboyant terrorist with all his other underlings. Resembles the Red Bamboo thing. But our introduction to Demonicus is through Batragon, who is not Baragon or Barugon, as he may sound like. He's Batragon. Trying to find the page. Think Smog from the Rankin Bass cartoon. Don't know if you can see that. He gets an issue to himself, but then Demonicus' other monsters join the fight against Godzilla. Let's see what those are. Gilaron is a lizard, Leporax is a moth, and Centipore is a worm. Leporax lasts the longest of these and seems to be the Mothra pastiche, though. A villain. Let's see, Demonicus is racist and has a conversation with Gabe, where he gives his backstory. It's not really important, though. He'll pop up again later. We can talk about that more. And then after that, Dugan decides to put Godzilla in captivity. So issue 6, 1 issue arc, but it leads into some other stuff because behind the scenes they're building a better ship called the Behemoth for Godzilla Force to use, and also they're building Red Ronin, who we'll get to in a second. But between that, Dum Dum Dugan decides to put Godzilla in captivity, and it leverages some imagery, King Kong style imagery of Godzilla being enslaved and in chains and stuff. Yeah. This possibly mirrors Demonicus, and that's the thing about the tropey comic book storytelling being very simple, and yet also a picture being worth 1,000 words. There's a lot you can read into every lesson Dugan learns in this series influencing how he does the next adventure. Even through to the end. He has this rivalry with Godzilla, but it eventually gets more friendly. Dugan hates Godzilla up until the second time Godzilla saves his life. And Gabe is advocating for Godzilla, but not as strongly as Robert, So, in any case, from that point, Godzilla obviously escapes. He's enraged. And so Red Ronin enters the story because Robert wants to de-escalate the situation, so he steals it. And samurai-inspired thing. Might not be the best image, that's the blueprint. With sort of a head crest, not the Egyptian-style head crest, but it reminds me a lot of Giant Robo, which is not a Toho, it's a Toei thing. But you mix that with the Pacific Rim Jaegers because of the way that Robert controls Red Ronin is sort of like the psychic control of the Jaegers in Pacific Rim, but only one pilot in this case. So after the fight, we get to a filler arc, but it's very interesting, very funny. Let's get to page 152. Godzilla breaks the dam in Boulder and gets swept to Las Vegas, where our other POV character for this issue is gambling his last dime, ostensibly to try and help his dying mother and medical bills and stuff, but he... It's sort of a little cartoon anecdote. He gets the dime back at one point, use it to call his wife or something, and she chews him out, so then he gets the dime back from the coin and goes off to the next place to gamble his life savings in Reno. This reminds me of the way IDW would later style their comics, which is very interesting to me because this predates that again. But it influences the style, the tone, the structure, and the general premise of a few things. The tone is very similar to Monster Beast Theater here, which I have a video on. You can follow some links to find that. A very fun video and very fun thing. But IDW also released a ton of things, enough to fill a best of volume and a few more volumes after that. Specifically, there's one that I want to highlight. I'll get more into it later, but the idea of following a character and how Godzilla comes into their life for a brief moment that changes it is notable here. Also, there is a later IDW comic that just came out where Godzilla goes to different cities and destroys them. Godzilla versus Boston, Godzilla versus other places. That starts here. It's a very influential comic, not only to the movies, but to the comics. Okay, anyway. After that little filler arc, we get Yetrigar, who is our next major opponent for Godzilla. He is an irradiated giant caveman, or Bigfoot. Specifically, it'd be a Type 4 Bigfoot if you have any kind of classification, belief in the Bigfoot classification, I should say. And Yetrigar is even stronger than Godzilla, but the issue explains it, with Godzilla being unfamiliar with the concentrated force of punches. Now, Showa Godzilla, who it's heavily implied, this is the Showa Godzilla after his adventures in the main films, he not only understood how to take a punch, but also perform them. So that is our first evidence that this either isn't that Showa Godzilla, or they didn't pay attention to it. I like the plot point, actually, in a vacuum, because he hasn't fought many opponents that can punch him up to this point in the comic. It's a neat, non-human way to characterize Godzilla. I like it a lot, actually. And it also pays off later that after this, he's better taking punches from other things. Red Ronin helps out in this issue as well, and we kind of get into the idea that, this two-issue arc, into the idea of something the Ultra series now does, where there's a helper, kaiju or mech. Very much the Earth Garon to Godzilla's Ultraman Blazar, if you get that reference. After that, we get into an alien arc, the actually Mega Monsters arc. It's 3 issues long. I want to go to page 205 to highlight Godzilla's character for a second. Because the characterization of Godzilla is a big draw of this issue, of this run, in fact. Many issues spend a lot of time on the idea that, he's not evil, but he's also not really knowable. We'll pose suggestions that, maybe he does care about Rob, and eventually he definitely does, but when that starts, it's still unclear to us. There's a benign and a malicious, and somewhere in between of explanations for his actions. So page 205 is opening cover, and shows him taking out a train. Question: what is the difference between a freight train and a monstrous serpent seen through the eyes of a creature such as Godzilla? The answer: none. Very interesting. He fights the Beta Beast in this issue. Okay, how do I explain this? Okay, Rob is a pacifist and not just about Godzilla. So he pilots Red Ronin but doesn't want to kill anything. He feels really bad about having to kill Yetrigar. Aliens want to use Godzilla, so they take him to space, and he fights the Beta Beast, an alien porcupine that follows the design philosophy of 70s Ultra Series kaiju. You know, very busy designs and unnecessary projectiles, weird coloration of the arms that switches to coloration for the body, whatever. It works better on the page than it does in the suits. Compare this to Yetergar, who is just a Bigfoot. We're getting a variety of styles of kaiju in this book, which is also good. We get a beam lock in this fight. That's always fun, but they explain there's Planet Beta and Planet Mega. And don't read into those names more than just for a fun dichotomy there. Alien dinosaurs are used by both in this fight. The Beta aliens are actually good guys, so they're the ones that kidnap Godzilla. They send him back to Earth when one of the Mega Monsters, who is Triax, is sent by the Megans. Again, don't read into the names. Megan, Mega, Megan, okay. So, I mentioned there's Ultra Series inspiration, probably unintentional with this thing. Now, I think there's some Gamma inspiration in terms of some of these kaiju of the Mega Monster variety. Because Triax is a turtle with Mr. Crab's eyes that can fly through the air by sending beams out of his legs. And there's not really a good picture for that right now, but Rion is, well, they say multiple things in terms of a clam-shaped monster that can fly, but the edge of the tail looks kind of like Zigra, and the head from this angle looks a lot like the scrapped concept for Virus that we discussed in that other Gamma ranking. In any case, Crowlar can burrow. He's the most stereotypical of these, a horned lizard, but with some insectoid appendages, and that's where it deviates from the idea of the Baragon or Jiger inspiration. The Mega Monsters have an Energex ray. They can power up the Mega Monsters, which will kill them in the process. The Badens sacrifice their lives to stop that from happening. The war gets called off. Godzilla has to fight all three of the Mega Monsters after Red Ronin dies. Dum Dum, Dugan, and Gabe Jones help Godzilla, and this is where, in that arc of overcoming his hatred for Godzilla, Dum Dum Dugan finally decides, okay, Godzilla has saved me twice, I'll not call him a monster anymore. And it turns out that issue was in Salt Lake City. So Salt Lake City is one of the notable places Godzilla visits in this book. It's pretty cool. Now, we waste 2 issues on Godzilla versus Cowboys. And you'll probably enjoy it if you like cowboy movies or if you like the weird IDW plots, but I'm just going to skip over it for the most part. Except to say, a guy rides Godzilla's tail, a cowboy specifically, and I think it's the first time in any media that has ever happened. Obviously, in Godzilla versus Megaguirus from 2000, the main character rides on Godzilla's dorsal fins to try and track him and stuff. Later on, characters touch Godzilla. In this issue, he picks up a lot of people. So this predates the movies doing that, or having them ride him. It's possible lesser known manga had done it before this, but this might be where that starts. That's kind of cool. Alright. And now, the claim to fame of this run, outside of Demonicus, even more so than Demonicus, is the Shrunken Godzilla arc from issue 17 through, what is it, like 23 or something? 22. And it's also getting into the last third of this story, leading up to the big battle in New York. Okay. So once again, Dugan wants to catch Godzilla, but he's learned a lot in terms of how he's doing it. Going to Henry Pym, formerly Ant-Man, now Yellowjacket, to use his Pym particles in a reducing gas to shrink Godzilla. It's better than just chaining him up. Also less invasive than just chaining him up. In Organic, he had also harebrained comic book logic way to bring in an Avenger or two without the entire team yet. So Godzilla gets pissed off and picks up Dugan when this happens, but Godzilla shrinks in the process. They capture him, and the next issue after that, he's a fugitive in New York because he falls out of the cage that they put him in after Rob unlocked it, because Rob has some issues here. Anyway, page 326 and 327 is very cool because, well, he's inches tall. He fights a rat in the sewers. And this is one of the best fights in the whole thing. I brought it up multiple times. There's a variety of monsters that he fights in this thing, and usually non-Toho monsters or just stock monsters to put in the thing can be hit or miss. Like Godzilla the series, the sequel to the 98 movie, the Saturday morning cartoon, has no Toho monsters except for debatably Godzilla, since that design's been disowned and then reabsorbed, whatever. Some of them are cool, some aren't. They all do still feel like from that one show. This feels like from the Godzilla movies, from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids or whatever, and from also the Ultra series. All of those influences in these monsters, which includes a normal rat. One of the best fights in the thing. Alright, so Rob finds Godzilla. He feels bad about lying to him because he had to get him comfortable with the gas and stuff. He puts Godzilla in a fedora and trench coat, and they have to go through all of the various sites of New York. That's police officers and gangsters threatening them. And then page 342 onward. I mentioned this already, but Dum Dum Dugan fights a now 7 feet tall Godzilla with a trash can shield lid. Since Jetsugar, Godzilla now understands punches and can return fire with a karate chop. It's just a really fun fight scene that happens. So Dum Dum Dugan is now also one of the fights against Godzilla, and that's kind of cool. Godzilla runs off. Okay, now the Fantastic Four, they go to the Baxter Building. Or we go to the Baxter Building. We see them join the fight, and Dum Dum Dugan does not want to work with them after the Champion's failure earlier. But we're in the lead up to the Fantastic Four and the Avengers facing off against Godzilla, who's full size, in the final 2 issues. So, 20 feet tall Godzilla, and the Fantastic Four can have one-on-one fights with him. Instead of having to scale a big building, they can just like punch him, wrap around him, use their things. Godzilla's strength is still enough to knock out Sue when she tries to use her force field on him. But it's an easier way to have this fight than if he's giant. So I see the utility there. The Thing references King Kong, not through fighting Godzilla, as happened in the Showa film, but through climbing, which makes me wonder if Kong is meant to be a film in this universe. Okay, then the Devil Dinosaur joins in this fight. I guess technically the same arc. Here's what happens. The Fantastic Four use Doctor Doom's time machine to send Godzilla into the Cretaceous period. I gotta say, that disrupts the flow, I think, of building to a big fight scene, a full-size Godzilla in New York against the Avengers, and now we have him randomly in the past for 2 issues. There's also primitive people there for some reason, because I guess Devil Dinosaur had a series. He has a human companion called Moon Boy, and there's an entire villainous faction there. Moon Boy reminds Godzilla of Rob, and what plays out is that the versus matchup of Devil Dinosaur and Godzilla gets interrupted by a forced team-up. Keep that in mind for when you get to the 2020s series. Anyway, when Devil Dinosaur and Godzilla team up, the present-day heroes are all going their separate ways, and one of the most contrived things that I've seen from this comic, Godzilla's radiation causes Doom's time machine to malfunction. So he finally goes back to full size and comes through the time machine somehow, just go with it, comic book logic and all that. And finally, after that narrative cul-de-sac, we can have our final showdown in New York. And Godzilla is now angry. Because of the effects of the time travel, his brain's scrambled, so he won't hold back. Okay. Page 411 has a really great J. Jonah Jameson moment. But I should first say, Spider-Man has not been here yet. The X-Men have not been here yet. The Avengers will be here, the Champions were here, and the Fantastic Four, we had some stuff from Tony Stark and Henry Pym. They didn't want to have the Marvel heroes overshadow Godzilla. And also X-Men weren't selling well, so no references to them outside of Iceman and Angel, who are in the Champions. Spider-Man will come here, but he'll be a bit too late. Jameson wants Parker, because Peter Parker is the best photographer they have, and Godzilla comes right up close to J. Jonah Jameson. And Jameson has this personality that you know from the Raimi movies. Pisses Godzilla off so much that he breathes some hot air, not the beam, not the radioactive beam, just some hot air into the thing to trash his room. And Jameson really wants him to find Parker so they'll get a picture and they'll scoop everyone else. And now the Avengers roster, here is Vision, Iron Man, Scarlet Witch, Yellow Jacket, Thor, the Wasp, and Captain America. So Captain America and Scarlet Witch stay behind because they can't fly, I guess. I thought Scarlet Witch could fly, but maybe that's a later addition to the comics. Dugan really does not want to work with the Avengers. Thor's Mjolnir hurts Godzilla. Yellow Jacket and Wasp go inside Godzilla's ear. So this is giant Godzilla, and that's how you would choreograph the fight differently than if it's just one-on-one with a 20-foot Godzilla. Anyway, final issue time. They try to stop Godzilla from getting into the Empire State Building. He has the strength of a god, because when he pushes against the building, Thor pushes back, and it's equal. Anyway, last-ditch effort against him from the Avengers and the Fantastic Four. Godzilla picks up Rob, who begs him to leave, and he listens. So the plot point of his brain being scrambled went nowhere, and really has no point. As payoff to the joke of Parker being unavailable, Spider-Man swings in right as Godzilla's leaving, and gets a really crappy shot for the bugle. And that's just a really funny use of Spider-Man and Parker here. I would not write it any other way. We will get the Spider-Man versus Godzilla matchup eventually, but I like this joke. It's really funny to me. You might find it weird everything's building to the fight against the Avengers, who only exist because those heroes' books weren't selling well. The Avengers only became big with the MCU. But, as I mentioned, this was at a time when the X-Men weren't selling well at all, so it makes sense, and it is ironic in retrospect, given how big the Avengers are now. Alright, Godzilla fans might have a bit of difficulty getting into this series because of just how different Godzilla looks here than in any movie. Here's some art. This is more accurate how he appears in the book. But it was a lot of fun to read, and is single-handedly making me a bit more of a Marvel guy than a DC guy, because Marvel somehow gets Godzilla better than DC has. Anyway, Marvel lost the rights to use Godzilla after this, but comic storylines never end. They just peter out and get revived a few decades later. Demonicus came back as an Iron Man villain with a heavily mutated version of Godzilla that they never refer to as Godzilla. Kind of a depressing end for that character, but I guess he comes back again later on. It implies Godzilla breaks free, and in an unlicensed cameo, he's sent up to attack the surface by a villain called Mole Man in like the 2000s. But now it's time for the grand return to Marvel Comics in a few new short runs. Initially, it was announced as Godzilla vs. Marvel, some one-shot Marvel battles across the decades, starting in the 60s, Fantastic Four, then was 70s, 80s with Hulk, the New Avengers era, X-Men, then New Avengers era. Finally, with a modern Thor story. However, they also then announced the return of the original Godzilla and the actual Marvel Universe in Godzilla Destroys the Marvel Universe. And actually, while I was making the script for this video, they have announced another series, Godzilla Infinity Roar, that follows up on Destroys the Marvel Universe. I fully expect to have another omnibus at one point of those. Whatever. Okay, so the previous run was in the 70s, very much pulling from the then contemporary Showa films. For whatever reason, it seems they only had access to the idea of the 56 American poster of Godzilla and not any of the details or supporting cast that would confirm without a doubt that those films were canon. Now we're in 2025, and the context is far different. Toho is pushing Godzilla as a more global staple brand. And Toho on some of these brand collaborations is more hands-on in laying out certain rules, other times letting the creatives do whatever they want. But at least with a cultural incentive to have a greater film accuracy in the designs. And now with other monsters licensed out alongside Godzilla, Move Over Batragon, Baragon, or any others of the catalog might actually share the small page with Godzilla in an official Marvel comic now. We'll have to judge how well they portray this kaiju because it'll be a little bit hit or miss. So the first issue is Godzilla vs. the Fantastic Four. And first, I should say, these are one-shot issues and nothing implies this to be in canon with that original run because they fought him already in a very different way and it's not acknowledged, really, here. I'm of two minds about this issue. On the one hand, it's the most obligatory stock Godzilla crossover premise possible. He fights the heroes, and then has to team up with them against an actual villain, and Ghidorah gets to be here, which is kind of cool, but After other Godzilla comics I have read, I'm kind of sick of gimmicky subpar Ghidorahs that exist literally only to fight. A new monster introduced in this role would have had less to live up to, but Ghidorah, a character has a history of being controlled by less interesting villains, is not really breaking new ground when he becomes the Herald of Galactus. Though the marquee value of Ghidorah makes him the best monster for this role, from a story standpoint, it doesn't change if it's Ghidorah or Batragon here, which kind of sucks. At the same time, and on that other hand, I think that the Fantastic Four themselves are pretty well characterized here, showing the intellect and sense of responsibility of Reed, the empathy and care of Sue, a little less for Johnny, but a good bit of dialogue showing Ben Grimm's idiolects and diction that help to get across the type of character he is. The situation of fighting Godzilla brings out the best of these characters in a way that reminds me why I actually did enjoy them at one point when I was a very little kid. Also, there are creative uses of powers here that are always good to see in a superhero comic. Even so, the medium and IPs can do so much more at their best. So I hope it improves from here. So versus Hulk, Demonicus is back. Our antisocial, racist demon scientist is finally able to fight his arch rival again, and this time he gets to use Toho monsters. Though I will not spoil which ones he controls, except for saying they're solid underrated kaiju we've talked about before on this channel. Demonicus is in a very different place from where we left him, now serving as a Thunderbolt under General Ross, with a mutated, scarred face, but he is ever the schemer. It's a bit unfortunate that this issue falls into a similar problem as the last, and having Godzilla need help from the Hulk against one of his own villains, but the next issue is against Spider-Man, so hopefully the Marvel hero gets to be the one knocked out this time. Gary Duggan wrote this Godzilla and Hulk comic, and he's getting a second chance in Destroys the Marvel Universe, where he's promised a more in-depth fight between the two, and yes, it does happen. Versus Spider-Man. Okay, this issue is the most meta-textually confusing to me so far. The original Godzilla Marvel run was mainline canon, and the previous Versus match with the Hulk brought back Demonicus, and set itself sometime in the 80s, which would be after that series. Versus Hulk also established that Tony Stark and Fin Fang Foom, a giant monster, died. I do not know if that happened at this point in the mainline comics, but Versus Spider-Man references all of this while tying the seminal mainline Secret Wars event into this, as well as the classical origin of Venom. So it seems like the mainline 616 universe is canon to Versus the Hulk, which is canon to Versus Spider-Man, but the way this issue ends makes it seem to be impossible for this to be canon to the mainline 616 series. Specifically, Spider-Man's black suit bonds with Godzilla, and in the ensuing separation of those two, what becomes of the symbiote and Eddie Brock is not Venom, but a form of Venom still bearing Godzilla characteristics. In fact, they call it God Venom, and he's got dorsal fins. I don't know, man. It's the most obligatory so far of these. Even the Hulk issue had a point to it, showing off what happens to Demonicus. It's not really bad here. It's more of a Heisei design. I like the Heisei design for Godzilla, and the Venomized Godzilla makes for a fun fight. There's kind of an intrusive script from Nick Lowe, is that his name? Near constantly, he puts in some asides here that existed in the previous comics. It's a staple of comics to have an editor or writer or whatever put in little notes there, but it's incessant here. It foreshadows, I guess, the King in Black having a connection to Godzilla, and that'll be followed up on in Infinity War eventually, but that's a different continuity, all that stuff. All right, versus the X-Men. Versus the X-Men. This one felt like the most like the classic Marvel run to me, in how it explored Godzilla's morality. The issue is quite blatant about it, but the concept of the hated and marginalized X-Men lends itself well to a destructive but misunderstood monster. They also chose a more Heisei-inspired design with it, and that was the Godzilla driven by loneliness. Check out my review of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 for more information. I do not know if this is meant to be in continuity with anything else in particular, because it misrepresents the conflict in Godzilla Raids Again to be about Godzilla trying to stop Anguirus from attacking, which is not true to the story. It does not reference any other issues, as far as I can tell. And that said, Wolverine is also in the next one, and that doesn't reference this. In terms of the obligatory appearance of other Toho monsters, It's a tri-sentinel mecha kaiju that forces the team up. I believe it has Rodan and Biolante and another kaiju in there. Batra. It is what it is. This is all leading to a really great final issue. We got to get through some slog to get there, though. Alright, so versus the Avengers, versus the new Avengers specifically. And so that lineup is not the one from the new movie, but it's Captain America, Iron Man, who I guess always have to be on the team, Spider-Man, Wolverine, Luke Cage, and Spider-Woman. One thing that stands out about this issue compared to the rest is that the MCU style quipping is on full display here. Not sure if I like it or not. But you see that this issue is the Rashomon-inspired structure, where it's recollections in a report to high-ranking S.H.I.E.L.D. member Maria Hill, who in the comics is more adversarial to the Avengers. In the films, she's a friend to them. And yeah, it's different from the previous ones, but it kind of results in this issue feeling like it doesn't have a compelling structure to me. It's really just jokes and quips about, oh, Wolverine, that wasn't your fault, it was your fault. Fing Fang Foom and Tony Stark are here, which again means that it's not canon with the previous ones. Fing Fang Foom gets to fight Godzilla, and that's kind of fun. Because he has pants and he talks. He's a dragon. That's outside of that, though. Jaguar has a fun use here. Don't want to spoil it. Okay. Versus Thor. Easily the best story in the series. The only one that really fulfills the promise of the premise of pitting Thor and Godzilla fully against each other in battle with no contrived team-up, no arbitrary stopping point. I would not have been mad at all if an expansion of this were the only story in this volume. But there's a bit more I have to explain. The other comics all took another kaiju with Godzilla, but adjusted their context to fit Marvel Godzilla or the Marvel Universe itself. Mothra is an unambiguous ally to Godzilla, and Anguirus is more destructive and greater of two evils compared to Godzilla, neither of which were true of the 50s through 80s films. This comic does the opposite. It grafts a story involving Thor and the villainous Hand organization to an extension of the 2001 film Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack, or GMK for short. GMK's take on Godzilla was the evilest and most fantastical, so it works in context. But there's a fun little canonicity nugget here you can overthink if you want to with me. So, the 1998 film was referenced in many of the Millennium films, digs at it primarily. And there's a line that implies that the 98 film happened in the GMK continuity. In such a way that GMK is not canon to 98, because they intended that to be their Godzilla, but some version of 98 is canon to GMK. And now, some version of GMK is canon to Thor's Marvel Universe here. Makes you wonder why he didn't help against Godzilla the first time. Anyway, so the Hand revives Godzilla, whose heart still beats after the ending of that film, and Thor fights. He can't defeat him, so he freezes him, but the Hand then gives him the power of All Black the Necro Sword, and so he becomes Godzilla, the God Slayer. Neat little thing. He destroys Asgard, and GMK Godzilla and Thor go at it. To the point that both of them die, and they're stuck in the afterlife, fighting for eternity. The art is also really great. Perfect issue. Alright. That's the end of this one. I spent more time on Godzilla's initial run, but one of the unlicensed illegal cameo appearances pre-2020s involved a villain called Mole Man sending Godzilla to attack the surface world. And I believe that scenario is being somewhat revisited for the new canonical 616 Godzilla appearance in Godzilla Destroys the Marvel Universe and Infinity War and beyond. I know some spoilers, but I'm waiting to purchase that run until the release of the collection, like what I have for Marvel Universe here, or until there's an omnibus with all of them, which I fully expect a few years from now. Anyway, I know from the author's statements that this is supposed to be in continuity with the main Marvel Universe, confirming that this was not. And also saying that this beast is the Showa Godzilla, which is also what the original Marvel Godzilla was implied to be, ergo, the same Godzilla. But in any case, as I showed to you, the original run of Marvel Comics for Godzilla had its own plotline, character, and story in arc chunks. Dugan was the main character, but whether or not Godzilla is fighting Demonicus, the Champions, the Avengers, or the Fantastic Four depended on what part of the story we were in. Destroys is mainline canon, showing him interacting with the Earthbound Marvel cast, but there will be a direct sequel to it called Infinity Roar, where he fights the cosmic fairing cast of Marvel, with a story involving the God King of the Symbiotes, Null. And I don't expect the tenure to end even there. Godzilla in Hell is already an extant comic from IDW, and it wouldn't surprise me for Marvel to put their own spin on that. Once Marvel lapses the comic rights to Godzilla, I fully expect them to have heavily mutate him into a nameless creature again for more issues. But what this whole ordeal is serving to accomplish is reuniting the Godzilla fandom with the Marvel Comics fandom, as our cults have always been related. While I'm here, I want to mention some other comics I have. IDW is prolific in this field. Here's a compilation for the best of Godzilla, Ghidorah, Mothra, and Rodan. I think other volumes cover other monsters. Having read through it, I think they calculated very carefully which series and which issues they wanted to include, and then had to graft a best of format to the point where I'm thinking if that is truly the best they have to offer for Ghidorah, then they did a bad job with him. But the premises are interesting for each of the series. I especially like the first issue in the compilation, where a thrill seeker climbs Godzilla for the government and has to deal with witnessing kaiju destruction and fights that close up. It's a very fun premise that would be a lot harder to do in live action, that still has an interesting spin on a simple hero's journey. In conclusion, I fully expect more from Marvel here, but I wanted to examine Godzilla's history in Marvel from the 70s to 2025, hopefully beyond. Thank you all for watching. You can follow us here on YouTube. Like and subscribe if you want to. We also have a Facebook page, and we got our conventional blog at planetcrunch.com. Thank you all for watching, and that's a wrap.